Welcome back. This is the video that is the hardest for me to make. That proved to be the case last year, and it's proven to be the case this year as well. So what is the topic? Well, it's the best releases of 2023, and I'm not talking about reissues. I'm talking about brand new music, new artists who are actively producing music. That is the subject for today, and it's so difficult because here's the thing with older music, you have this like opportunity to like absorb it over a period of time to become so familiar with it, and with new releases it's almost like coming to a conclusion so quickly without that benefit of like looking back and like having played something for such an extended period of time. I feel so much pressure, and the reason is not because I want to get it right in terms of what objectively are the best releases, but I want to get it right so that even though it's a subjective list, it's my own personal favorites. I want to get it right so that I'm making sure to acknowledge and honor the right musicians, because these are musicians and these are labels who really don't, for the most part, spend that much money on promoting their music. It really is putting it out there and waiting for the reaction and having that dictate how much some of these albums sell. And so I just feel a little bit of pressure, not because I think that I have the most this is the most popular YouTube channel. It's just that I want to do my part, right? I want to make sure that I'm acknowledging the right artists, that I'm helping. If one person decides to purchase an album, then I think that's a win, and I want to make sure that I'm putting forward the right ones. So a little bit of pressure here for me, and that's why this is so difficult. But what we're going to do today is we are going to go through my favorite releases of 2023 in terms of new jazz music, and I'll put jazz in quotation marks. What we have here are 13 albums, and because that's an awkward number and unlucky for some, I'm adding one that's actually not squarely in this space of the stuff that I typically reference on this channel, but it's one that I wanted to bring up anyway to kind of add on to that 14th. So that's what we're going to get into today. I hope you're as excited about this as I am nervous, and but we'll dive in. So before we get started, as always, if you could hit like and you could subscribe to this channel, it helps me out quite a bit. If you could, let's see what else. Go over to Instagram and you can follow me at what_can_brown. Some of these albums I've highlighted on Instagram throughout 2023, and some I haven't, but I'm excited to highlight them today. So thanks very much, and let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the very first title that I want to highlight for the best of 2023 is Andy Hay. So for those of you who follow my channel, you'll recognize the name because this is a guy who actually made my list last year as well, and he's made it again this year with his album Children of the Sun. This album was self-released, and what you're looking at is actually a hand-painted cover. That's right, he doesn't mass produce his covers. In fact, I don't think he has any editions of his albums that are mass produced. He's hand painting them every single cover. Now don't get me wrong, like, he's painting them all in the same kind of style, but every one is unique. And that's here's the thing, all of that would mean nothing if the music wasn't fantastic, but it is fantastic. And so I definitely want to highlight the fact that he does this beautiful art for every single release. It is extremely impressive. So Andy Hay is a percussionist. He's played with Nat Birchall, and that's probably where a lot of folks out there might have heard his music, but he's been doing solo stuff for the last several years, and each title has been fantastic. So to kind of round out this sort of picture on in terms of his covers, obviously it's all hand done, and it's not just limited to this. Like he put in this like separate little sheet that's like, that has the name of the title, and he's signed it. He's got like a lyric sheet here and more details that he's about each of the tracks that he's actually kind of like stitched. There's this handwritten note where he's like thanking you for your purchase. I mean, this is a guy who his music is about like appreciation and like love and like some of these sort of grandiose sorts of themes, right, that you might find from like Pharoah Sanders, and yet when you're looking at the actual package, you can tell that it's not just talk, right? This guy puts just so much energy and care into his into his releases, and the best part is that it comes across in the music. So I mentioned Pharoah Sanders. For me, Andy Hay's music has the most in common with Pharoah Sanders. Some of it is in the instrumentation and the types of voicings that you hear in the music, and I think the fact that that specifically I think his approach to drumming is similar to some of the drum work that you might hear in some of Pharoah Sanders's impulse work. The kind of vamping vocals, right? He incorporates vocals in a number of his tracks. But more importantly, I think they're connected in message as well. And like I said, it's kind of this like love and appreciation and thanks and positivity, and you really feel that in his music. And I think that one of the things that most impresses me by his music is not only that he's a student. In fact, he references some of his influences in the track names. He's not even being coy with it, right? So you've got a track that references Coltrane, one that's Lonnie Liston Smith. There's Pharoah Sanders, Ornette Coleman, and Rahsaan Roland Kirk that are referenced in the titles. I think that the fact that he not only tips his hat to them, but does it so expertly and so well while incorporating, again, so much like energy and positivity into the music. You can't listen to this and not smile. And that's kind of unusual, right? A lot of times you might be listening to music and kind of like scratching your head and rubbing your chin or maybe tapping your foot, but this is like one that actually makes you feel something. And I'm a huge fan of this guy, and I really hope that he continues to do exactly what he's doing, while also finding a way to make sure that he's getting compensated appropriately for this beautiful music that he's playing. All right, so one of the things that I want to do is leave you with a track, at least for each of these albums, if I can. And there's a little bit of sort of self-interested here, right? Because I personally want each of these musicians to continue to make music, and so I want to evangelize each of these albums, right? So what I would recommend is the opening track, actually, maybe to start with, and it's titled I Believe in Love. I think you should start there, and you'll really get a sense for the energy and the style of music that you're going to get in this thing. Know that it's beautifully recorded. This happens to be a double disc as well, so it's a ton of music. I know that it can be difficult to get some of these titles all the way out of Europe and into the United States for those folks who reside in the same country that I do. But when it comes to Andy Hay, that additional shipping cost is well worth it. And like I said, for a double disc, right, you're getting a ton of music content here. So anyway, that's the first one I wanted to call out today is Andy Hay's Children of the Sun. All right, the next one that I want to talk about is, may butcher some of these names, Valtteri Laurel. And the title is Tigers Are Better Looking. So this is put out on the We Jazz label, which is out of Finland, and it was put out on February 3rd, so it's been out a little while. The format on here is a nonette, so there are 9 musicians here. It is more composition-based sort of chamber jazz than it is kind of this free-form improvisational focused kind of music. And yet I think that what this album does as a result is it really stands out. There's not a lot of new music that's coming out that sounds anything like this. And the first time that I listened to this, I was like astonished at how good it is. So the track that I do want to, that you should write down right now is titled At the Villa d'Or. So D''OR, At the Villa d'Or. I think it's the highlight of the whole album, but it's a highlight among many because I think that every single track here is phenomenal. If I were to describe this in style, I would say that it feels in debt to, say, West Coast jazz, sort of that cool jazz of the 1950s. One of the things that was apparent to me and then became validated later when I read something on this album is that when I listened to this, what occurred to me is that it sounded like Charles Mingus. And it sounded like some of his earlier sort of orchestrations or arrangements that he did. And what was interesting in reading about this later is that the musician said, or maybe it was one of the musicians who confirmed that Mingus was an influence on this album. What I will say, that one of the things that surprised me is that I've never heard the clarinet in a modern context sound as good as it does right here. So clarinet leaders was a common thing of like big band, right, in the swing era. Not so much since then. There's not that many sort of noteworthy clarinet players, but it works so well here. And I think that I think having the clarinet kind of floating on top of a cluster of like low register instruments is really effective. And what I'm talking about here is baritone sax and trombone and bass. And when they're layered at the bottom and you have these like flightier sort of organic sounds that are up top, the outcome of that is just it's so beautiful. Even within the context of this entire list, there are a few that affected me as much as this album did right here. And so therefore I'm going to leave you with another highlight, and that's going to be track 3, and it's titled Wide Sargasso C, or Sargasso C. This is again with the clarinet out front, and it's one that I think feels that it probably has the most in common with Mingus's music in terms of having these like multiple groupings of instruments, or excuse me, multiple groupings of musicians that independently are playing these like repeating lines almost as a call and response. And it's a technique or a tactic that I've heard used in Mingus's compositions of that era. And I think that's one of the reasons why this sort of recalls that style as much as it does. So again, hugely impressed with Valtteri Laurel's Tigers Are Better Looking. All right, number 3, and this one came out on March 10th. This is Lucas Traxel's One-Eyed Daruma. This is a title that I've held up on this channel before, and the reason why is I think in my Q1 sort of preview video, I referenced that it was one of the titles that I was most looking forward to, and guess what? It really, really delivers. So the format here is you have Lucas Traxel on bass, you have Otis Sandsjo on tenor sax, and you have Moritz Baumgartner on drums. So that is just bass, tenor, and drums trio format. What I will say about this album is that there is really gorgeous production here. It does a great job, I think, of leveraging not only the natural sounds that you might expect from these 3 individual instruments, but even the unnatural sounds. I feel like each of these musicians are sort of extracting new types of sounds out of their instruments in ways that you haven't necessarily heard them before. And I think that is just incredibly innovative and really exciting to be able to hear. The music otherwise is, it's very sort of emotive. There's a lot of emotion that is being conveyed in this music. There's a lot of detail and a lot of nuance in terms of how it's recorded. I would say that aspects of it are slightly experimental, at least in terms of the incorporation of, or the expression of some of the soloing. I would say that it's very stark as well. So again, with this trio format and not having that that piano, you know, it feels like sometimes there's just like a single instrument playing at a time. And the starkness is so beautiful, although what you'll typically find is that it doesn't linger there for too long before it starts layering on the other musicians. I just think this thing is incredibly beautiful, as beautiful as the cover is, in fact, because I'm a huge fan of this cover. If I were to reference a particular track for you to preview, I think probably track 2, which is titled "The Call," is a huge highlight for me. But again, really, the whole album is beautiful. Highly recommend this one. All right, the next one up, this was put out on March 31st, and it is titled Mirage, and it is by the band or the group Moe Perhaps, M-O-H-S. So this one was put out actually on the BMM Records label, not a label I was familiar with, but certainly one I'm going to be following from this point forward. So the musicians that you have on here, and again, apologize for pronunciation issues, but you do have Zachary Kisk on trumpet, you have Erwan Valaza on guitar, you have Gaspar Collin on bass, and you have Nathan Vanderblock on drums and vocals, perhaps. One of the things that occurs to me across this entire list is that I often reference a lot of trumpet-led stuff in my top music lists, and it's because I love the instrument and because I played it, and so I feel a particular affinity and I pay a little bit more attention. So just kind of know that in terms of, you know, one of those like biased things, I suppose, when I put together these lists. But I personally think that the leader's performance, so again, Kisk, is his last name. His performance on the opening title titled Quartz is some of the most gorgeous, though granted not most complex, but most gorgeous playing of the year on trumpet. I think that this is absolutely phenomenal. The clarity of the instruments, it feels like there's so much attention placed in the actual production of the thing, and it's absolutely gorgeous. I would say that otherwise, so Valaza, who's the guitarist, he's highlighted really nicely on the title track Mirage, which I actually think is like layered with loops, and I think you're going to really love that one too. So what I would say is preview Quartz and preview Mirage, and I think anybody who does both of those things is going to find themselves trying to find a copy of this thing, because again, this is phenomenal. All right, so the next one up is unfortunately one that I don't have a vinyl copy of, and I feel a little bit guilty for even including it, because if I haven't listened to it on vinyl, how can I recommend it, right? But the problem is that as soon as this list posts and I eventually get my copy, say in a month, then I'm gonna like regret, and how do I incorporate it back in? So I wanted to, it still is on vinyl, it's just my copy's not arriving until like the end of January, because this thing is so much in demand. Some of these titles just like sell out, especially when they're in Europe and it's hard to get a copy. So anyway, I apologize, but I did not want to exclude this fantastic album from the list, and it is titled Spirits by the Circling Sun. This was put out on Soundway Records. It was released on May 19th of this year. And I believe that this is like my first exposure to New Zealand jazz. Although I think the label is out of London, but I do think the musicians are from New Zealand, or at least many of them. So speaking of, the lineup includes Julian Dine, J.Y. Lee, Finn Scholes, Corey Champion, Guy Harrison, Ben Terua, and Cameron Allen. This album is mostly instrumental, but does have some vocal choir accents. Generally speaking, I think I've probably mentioned this before, I can be skeptical of incorporation of too much vocals, and I'm very particular. And this is just like one of those weird things that I have that's like my preferences, where I know a lot of people don't mind it, and for some reason I'm like, oh, there's too much vocal in that. This is one where I don't mind the vocal, and in fact I think it does just an excellent job of accentuating the excellence of the music. I'm a huge fan of this stuff. So if I'm going to pick a track for you, I think Kohan, or Kohan, is a highlight. It's flute dominated, very spiritual jazz in style. The track Bones is another highlight, which incorporates a saxophone solo. Spirits Part 2 is another excellent track, really interesting, repeating sort of either synth line or some other type of computer generated sound. I mentioned early on that some of these albums were meshing these things together in really excellent ways, and I think that this is a really good example. This album for me is similar in feel to Pharoah Sanders' work. Similar use of auxiliary percussion, but the important thing here is that it doesn't attempt to replace Pharoah's voice on the record. Instead, it sort of finds some of those melodic statements more from flute and piano. And so it's not a copycat, okay? Like, I know that there's some musicians out of Europe who are kind of playing that like blasting saxophone sound that in some ways feels like it's like too closely approximating Pharoah Sanders' voice. That is not what this is whatsoever. I think that this is it's not derivative. I think this is like really excellent, really interesting stuff, and I feel like it adds a modern layer to spiritual jazz that I think again is achieved through that layering of percussion. That sounds maybe a little bit more contemporary with some of the loops that they incorporate as well. All right, so this next album up is actually, interestingly, one that I learned about from another YouTuber, and that was Junkie NL, which I believe stands for Netherlands. And the funny thing is that he had this in his top new jazz artists of the year, but not his top albums of the year. And yet when I listened to it in his top new jazz artists of the year, I thought that belongs in my top list of the year in terms of albums. So anyway, credit to him for actually tuning me into this particular artist. Funny thing is that several other of the albums that appear on this list also appeared in his one of his two lists, either best albums or best artists. But this is one that I learned for the first time from his video, and so I'll link that as well in case you want to check that out, because I think he has really good taste. So this album, well, it's by Yanni Mraz or Mraz, and as he struggled to pronounce the album title, so too will I. How it's spelled is Dybbuk space TSE. So Dybbuk, I don't know, something like that. So it's on Astematic Records. It was released on June 2nd. And the title, as much as I can't pronounce it, actually is from Jewish folklore, and it refers to a command to remove a spirit from a possessed body. So that's what the command is. And again, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce it again. So in terms of the lineup, you have Mraz on keyboards, you have Eli Orr on bass, you have Roy Remy on drums, Matan Vardy on sax, Joe Melnikov on flute, and Roy Zizovsky on trumpet. So what this is really, at least for me, is a blend of acoustic in terms of piano and drums with the modern element in terms of electronics, computer, or sort of synth sounds. There's even some like video game-esque music at points. And man, it works so well here. The grooves that it sets are like super engaging. They're soloing over it, so it gets you involved with it, and then it's kind of like takes you for a ride in terms of the solos. There can be some kind of like droning, almost ominous computer sounds in the background that I think add a really nice element to it. There's like a synth string group here as well on tracks like Palm, which I think is one of those tracks that you should check out. I think that it kind of adds an airiness as well, with like a flute soloing over it against this really infectious groove that's established by the piano, bass, and drums. And in fact, there are even some like hip hop elements to it as well. So this thing is just like a fusion of all of these different things in a way that I haven't heard them work together before on any other album. And I think it does just a phenomenal job. So as much as this cover is like, it almost looks like you're going to be getting into some like free jazz, or maybe even like, I don't know, metal or something. Don't be intimidated, I guess, by the cover, because this thing is absolutely phenomenal, and really was the last minute addition to my list for this year. All right, this next one up is by a label that should be familiar to you folks who follow this channel, and one of the reasons why is because JMI Recordings, who put out this album, also put out Sasha Berliner's Onyx, which was one of my absolute top titles of last year. And once again, they've made the list with Antero Sievert's Dear Bossa. So one quick caveat is that this may have actually been released digitally in 2022, but it wasn't on vinyl until maybe Q2, or even I think it was Q2 of this year. So in any event, I had to include it here because I didn't have the opportunity to get it on vinyl until well into this year. So again, with JMI, they seem to be doing excellent work, and this is no exception. So Antero Sievert, this is not the first time that he's recorded for JMI. In this context, we do have him in a sort of ensemble format. So it's Pedrito Martinez on percussion, Edmar Castaneda on harp, Elena Pinderhughes on flute, Antero Sievert obviously on drums, Corcoran Holt on bass, Rod Hull on drum machine, and Billy Oxtick on trumpet. As you might gather by the title of the album, it is bossa in theme. I think almost across every single track, or at least it's a pervasive theme across this album, but it's done in such a modern and beautiful way. I think that if this album, and I would say that if ensemble performance stands out specifically on JMI for any reason, it's because they seem to place equal attention on melody, the interaction of instruments, and the engineering. They really hit each of these things so well, so that you get the sense that these are that these are inspired musicians who are playing, you know, excellent music that have new ideas that they're putting forward, but also that they're stitching together and they're crafting melodies, whether within the context of composition or within their solos, that are really engaging. The engineering is done so well so that the music, it just sounds beautiful on vinyl. I think that JMI, again, is just one of these labels to watch. And coming into 2024, what we're going to be treated to is like a 3 LP or maybe a 4 LP set, and it's going to be titled Plum. That's something to look out for, because it's like David Murray and like Questlove are on it together, which is just super interesting. I already pre-ordered my copy. We'll see if that one, I've even previewed some digital tracks. That one may already like show up on my top 20 top list of 2024. So in any event, if there's anything to make sure that you know though with JMI, is that they don't. You got to go to them for the most part to get this music. So go to JMI Recordings website in order to get the music, because it can be difficult. I've seen it in stores, but where I haven't seen it is like Amazon, right? They're not like doing that, the major distribution channels. So just know that if you're going to look out for this music, I would say start with JMI Recordings and take a look at it there. All right, number 8 is Matthew Halsall's An Ever-Changing View. This is put out on his own Gondwana Records label, and this was put out on September 8th. So Matthew Halsall, I absolutely love. He showed up on my list with his, I think it was Salute to the Sun album, like 2 years ago. So he showed up on my top list then, and almost whenever he puts out an album, it's going to show up on my list, because his music is just so beautiful. This is another trumpet player. I think he leverages some similar influences as Andy Hay does, but I think that the way that Halsall executes them are a little bit different, not necessarily better or worse, just different. He does it in a more sort of clean and orchestrated way, as opposed to, I think, Andy Hay's more sort of organic approach to how they actually execute the recordings. Now, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of organic sounds here. The opening has this like harp, the opening track has this like harp set against birds that are chirping. So he brings in almost these like found sound, or, you know, these sort of like other recordings that he does. And I think it sets an amazing tone for this album. Otherwise, I think, let's see, Water Street is a huge highlight here. Absolutely gorgeous music with flute and either vibes or marimba. There's harp, an instrument. Harp is just an instrument he leverages pretty often throughout his albums, and I think that he has a special talent for incorporating it into his compositions, because it just always sounds great. If I were to classify this from a thematic standpoint, yes, it's spiritual jazz. Yes, it's like new age and world music, but it's also, there's also elements that are more, I would say, just distinctly like improvisational jazz, especially with Halsall's trumpet playing, and he does it just absolutely so well. I buy everything that Halsall puts out, and first and foremost, it's definitely because of the music, but I have to say that he does these like die cut, I don't even know if this is visible, he does these like die cut gatefold covers that are just absolutely gorgeous. Every single cover that he does is fantastic, and I want to say that he taps, I think, his brother for some of the design of these things, and they're all executed well. One thing to know about Matthew Halsall's music, again, is that this stuff sells out quick. You almost have to follow him on Bandcamp, and then anytime he posts an album, you almost have to like scoop it up. But the other thing that he does is that they often bring things back in print. There's second and third pressings and things like that. So I would recommend following this guy, like I said, and just be on top of it, because there's a reason why everybody loves this stuff. It's that good. So it occurs to me that many of my choices on this list are not exactly popular choices. And by that I mean, in those lists that I've seen from other publications and other reviewers, a number of these have not appeared on them. And that's, again, that's not to say that there's no value in having a more obscure list, right? It's just that these are the ones that spoke to me, I think, for some of the reasons that I spoke to at the up front before I even got into this. One of the titles, though, that seems to appear on many top lists is this one, and that is Yousef Day's Black Classical Music. So this was released on Brownswood and None Such. I believe it was a partnership between the two labels, and it was put out on September 8th, so the same day as that Matthew Halsall title. Again, this is one that everybody has been talking about this year, but for good reason. So let me first acknowledge that including an album titled Black Classical Music on a top jazz list, believe me, the irony does not escape me. Here's the thing. Black classical music has been used as a preferred term for jazz because jazz is a label that is too restrictive in many musicians' eyes. A variety of musicians don't like the term, and there's a lot of baggage that the term carries from it being used in the 50s and 60s and how musicians were treated and compensated and et cetera and et cetera. And there's lots of like really important points surrounding this argument. And so I do acknowledge the irony of including this in this list. So one of the reasons why Days feels that the term jazz is problematic is because music that falls into, I think, music from some of his influences like Rahsaan Roland Kirk and John Coltrane. He calls the music forever evolving and limitless in its potential, and so it's unfair to categorize it with a single term as if it's like a place in time that it can't there's confines that it can't expand it can't expand outside of. And so at the same time that I acknowledge that these are indeed important points, I think this list that I've put together and my inclusion in it, even though I'm calling this music jazz in terms of this like top list, what the actual components of the list are evidence of is that the music does indeed continue to evolve. I don't think that there's a need to call this particular album or another album a specific genre or not a specific genre. But at the same time, you know, I really liked Sufjan Stevens' latest album from 2023. And you'll note that while I think it's some of the best music of the year, it's not on this particular list. So what I'm trying to capture here is not necessarily, I'm not attempting to label music as much as I am trying to create a community around music that I think is helpful in a way that if you like this, then you'll also like this kind of thing. So I want to be clear that I'm not trying to be disrespectful either of Yousef Day's categorization of music that he plays or his preferred term of black classical music, which, by the way, is a term that's preferred by a lot of jazz musicians. I respect that, but I also acknowledge that within the context of this channel, in terms of creating this community and recommending music that I think people should hear, that it is helpful in some ways to create some guardrails, even if I myself am fully welcoming of those guardrails being expanded by these amazing musicians. So that's just a little bit of sort of preamble. What I think here in terms of highlights, I would say Pon de Plaza is a really, really nice track. It's a vocal heavy track and it features chronics. Really excellent, and actually one that's a little bit unnatural, I would say, from your perspective in terms of what you think I might like. This one, though, I still think was like, just shocked me in terms of how good it is. The opener, which is also the title track, is also fantastic. Raisins Under the Sun is one that features Shabaka Hutchings is another. On this album, you're going to hear drum loops, sort of synthesized looping horn lines. There's just so many styles that are merged here. And where I think this album succeeds is the blend of all of these different things. Styles, whether we call them jazz and hip hop and etc., it's done here in a way that makes each piece feel like it has this really infectious groove and even melody. I would say that as much as you can kind of try to categorize the entire album as, you know, a thing, I think that the tracks are distinct enough from one to the next. But I also think that there's almost this like, and I hesitate to say it, but like a pop sentiment within each, where, and I don't mean that in a bad way. What I mean is that it draws you in with this like infectious line, and it never loses you. It keeps the listener engaged throughout the music the entire time, and it doesn't shut the listener out of the sort of experience of listening to the music. And so maybe pop is the wrong word. Maybe I should just say that it's engaging, but I think that this is the reason why this album appears on so many top lists, because it means something and it resonates with everyone that listens to it. All right, so this next one is one that I've brought up in a recent video as well, and it was, I think it was a title that I was looking forward to being released or something like that. Anyway, This is a little bit of a complicated one to unpack. So the artist is going by Alto. And the name of the album is Bad with Names. So this is put out on what label? I think it was the New Soil label. And it was put out on October 6th, which happens to be my birthday. So the artist behind this, because Alto is not his name, the artist behind it is named Liam Shortall. And among others, the musicians on this album include Fergus McCready, Graham Costello, Johnny Woodham, and like I said, there are others. I do believe that this is mostly a Scottish sort of contingent. How I would describe this, though, is that out of all these albums, I think there's even more of the electronic component here in terms of hip-hop drums. There's dense, like lush orchestrations. I would say that, check out the track Hello. That's phenomenal. There's also probably my favorite on the album is titled XOXOXO. And I think this is a particular track where they really highlight those, again, hip-hop drum work, strings, horns, and I would say that it's my favorite on the album. Otherwise, I would say that this is just one that you kind of have to hear. I know that I've talked about it in a prior video, and I've gotten to a little bit more detail, I think, there. I would highly recommend you going over to Bandcamp and checking out, again, XOXOXO, I think is fantastic. And if you like kind of what the sort of the modern approach is with the merging of hip-hop, beats and improvised jazz music, I think that this is just a perfect execution of those two things coming together, and really, really interesting that it's coming out of basically out of Scotland. All right, we're moving towards the end of the list, but these titles are every bit as excellent. So this next one is by Makushin, and this is Move Into the Luminous. This was put out on the Blackford Hill label, which is a label I was not previously familiar with, and it came out on October 27th. What I will say this, high level like headline, this sounds phenomenal on vinyl. Really, really nice bass solos that are stark and beautiful. There still is a lot of vocals, which again, I keep, prefacing by saying, like, generally I don't like albums that have, instrumental jazz that incorporate too much vocals, but it works really, really well here. It's kind of folky and jazz at the same time, but enough of those jazz moments that I think it still belongs in this list. The cymbal work here sounds crisp and excellent throughout, especially against the like bass and electric guitar. It's almost like these crisp things against these like, deeper, more robust things. And I love that, I don't know, these two things, next to each other. What I would say is that the feel here almost has like I don't know if this is fair, it almost has like a Johnny Greenwood kind of feel. So Johnny Greenwood of Radiohead, who kind of did some movie scores, kind of has some of that feel in places. And it just, and again, I think that speaks to how excellent it sounds. So in terms of the lineup, you have John Thorne, who's the bassist. He played with, I think he plays currently with Lamb. Probably people know that band maybe more than the Makushin kind of name here. The drummer is Andrew Cheatham. The vocals are by Jojo Thorne and Nancy Elizabeth. David A. Jaycock on electric guitar. Andrew Wasilik on vibraphone. Martin Slattery on sax, piano, and keyboards. Roz Ula on synth. And Olivia Moore on violin. So it is a big group, but I think the format changes across the tracks. If I were to recommend a track for folks to preview, I'd say Landscape, which is the first one on side B. I think is excellent. But like I said, I mean, this is out of the UK. Blackford Hill is a label out of the UK. And I think as much as I don't necessarily prioritize this idea of like audiophile sound in my choice of best music, because I think the music needs to stand on its own, and it's almost like I don't know, it's almost like an aside that it's recorded well. This has both. It's not on here just because it sounds really good in terms of the execution and the engineering. It's because the music is great. But man, this thing sounds great on vinyl. All right, last two before we get into the honorable mention to make this not an unlucky number in terms of titles. So this one, you're not going to be able to tell from the cover, but it's titled Reservoir, and it is by the artist Reservoir. And what's problematic about this is that the last album they put out was also titled Reservoir by Reservoir. So you kind of have to know that going in. What I will say is that each of their albums that I've heard are fantastic. They released music on International Anthem, and this was put out on November 3rd. So I mentioned that the International Anthem didn't have as much of a presence on this list, but here is the title that is on the list. How I would describe this is a lot. As much as it belongs on this list, this is the most electronic out of any album that's on here. I would call it video game music. I would call it lo-fi. There's synthesizer, there's MIDI keyboards. You're really going to get a sense of like playing Nintendo or some of these early PC games. You really will. There's samplers, there's drum machines, but there's also instruments as well. I would recommend the opening track, which is titled Heavenly. It's kind of soundtrack-ish, but also this like overwhelmingly positive feel with the music. There's also a track called Inside Minds, which is fantastic, kind of has like a 70s vibe mixed with like a lo-fi synthesizer and acoustic guitar. Robot Dreams, if you listen to that one, it's going to sound exactly as the title suggests that it will, Robot Dreams. Overall, I would say the track Sunset is maybe my favorite. Absolutely gorgeous, heavy on MIDI and synthesizer. This one will surprise you, especially if you're really just narrowed in on like hard bop and post bop. You're gonna not even know what this is, and not even necessarily appreciate it. But I think if you're able to kind of expand your viewpoint of what improvised music is and composition and acknowledge that a lot of that is in here, it's just the choice of instrumentation. I think that you're going to really, really dig this thing. It's a phenomenal album. All right, so number 13 is unfortunately one of those that I haven't gotten the vinyl in yet, and the reason is because it was put out on December 15th, and I'm just waiting for it to ship. But I didn't want to lose the opportunity to include it because I have been listening to it as soon as some of those digital tracks came out, and I just knew that it was going to make this list. So the artist is Ambrose Akinmusire, and the title is Owl Sound. So this is not Akinmusire's only album of 2023. The other one is titled Beauty Is Enough, and it is great as well. That is actually a solo album. And some reviewers have actually called that one of their top picks of 2023. Now, I did enjoy that, but generally for me, I don't prefer as much the just single artist solo albums. And I found actually that this title, Owl Song, is something that I wanted to highlight in my best of the year. This is just really stark, really beautiful. The musicians here are Akinmusire with Bill Frisell and Herlin Riley, so that's trumpet, guitar, and drums. The guitar here, so Frisell's drum has this really beautiful tone that in some ways reminds me of like Daniel Lanois' music, for those folks who are familiar with him. Even though I don't have this particular title on vinyl, I can tell even from the digital tracks that it was expertly recorded. So I just can't wait to get this on vinyl. Akinmusire's tone has a real depth and warmth to it that I just think sounds absolutely gorgeous. I would say out of all the albums on this list, this is the starkest in terms of space and the sort of pace that they take. It's like slower, but it's absolutely gorgeous. I think it really reveals itself with repeated listens as well. And like I said, I think a lot of these titles, where they stood out versus all of the excellent ones. Again, I mentioned I went through like over 100 different titles. Where they stood out is almost imperceptible in terms of like when I listened to it, it just hit me in a way. And not just the first time, but the second time I came back, and the third time I came back to the music, and this is one that did. And it's difficult to explain, especially when it's stark, to point out the things that were particularly impressive. And so all I can say is that I think that the trio just really comes together well, and they play absolutely melodic, gorgeous music here. All right, so I was joking a little bit when I said that I didn't want to end this on 13 because actually I'm not a superstitious person whatsoever. The thing is that on last year's best of list, I included a album by this artist because I wanted to do not just some honorable mentions, but almost like something that's aside from the typical stuff that I talk about because again, I want to kind of spread the word about some of this great music that's out there, even if it doesn't fall within the confines of the stuff that I usually talk about on this channel. So what I wanted to bring up is this absolutely gorgeous album by an artist called Mayte, and this is on the Kitchen label. That is their name, Kitchen label. It is a Japanese, no, it's not Japanese. It is a Japanese band, but I believe it's a Singapore-based label. And the title is Kofu 3, or like Volume 3. So there has been a series of Kofu albums that Mayte, M-E-I-T-E-I, has put out. They're all beautiful. This is not in any way jazz. It is ambient, found sound type of stuff. It's like very, like, you're just going to kind of like zone out, and it's introspective, but it's beautiful. One of the things that that the artist talks about is this idea of capturing how he kind of terms the lost sounds of Japan. This like lost kind of I don't know, almost like mental landscape of what he not only remembers of Japan, but what like ancient Japan kind of would sound like if in music. And even just having a little bit of that context, I think when you listen to this, and maybe I'm a little bit biased because I lived in Japan when I was a kid, and I still feel somewhat connected to the culture because I have a Japanese stepmother and I have half Japanese, half brothers, and I like to spend time there. But I feel like everything that he says about his motivations behind this music is present here in the music, and I think there are few musicians who are making more beautiful work right now, especially in that ambient space. On top of that, the cover of this thing is just absolutely beautiful. There's a booklet inside. Everything about this thing was well executed. So for those folks who like tactile things that look pretty, you can scratch that itch as well. All right, so there you have it, 14 albums that represent my top picks of the year in terms of, well, mostly the jazz space, and then that one kind of additional one that I just wanted to make you aware of. So, here's the thing. I went through a ton of music, and it's hard to give everything the right amount of time and dedication into fully processing it all, and like coming to the conclusion of even curating this list, right? So I understand that, first of all, it's very subjective, but also it could be that I didn't fully process something, or maybe I missed an album entirely. And my only ask of you is that if you have a top album of the year, put it in the comments, because maybe I missed it, or maybe I didn't listen to it enough. And then on top of that, if you find anything on this list that you really like, maybe comment that too and tell me what you liked more so than anything else. And what I'll try to do as well is put, not necessarily purchase links, because most of this stuff is only going to be on like Bandcamp, but I'll at least try to link, provide a link for every single title with the ability for you to preview a track. Because I would love it if you would use this list to kind of, again, preview some new music, figure out maybe what you like. If you want to get it on a digital format, or if you want to get it on a vinyl format, then that's great. And if not, that's fine too, right? I'm only trying to keep some of these artists that I love in business as much as I can by helping promote the music that I love. So thanks very much, everyone. Appreciate you sticking with me. This is very much like I love doing these kind of year-end summation types of lists. For a variety of reasons. This is not my last one of the year. I do have just a couple more before we finish out 2023, so stay tuned for that. So until then, I'll see you next time.